Hey there, listeners. Well, accountability is more than a leadership trait. I actually think it's a commitment. And if you can model accountability in your actions, then you start to set a powerful example that then will in turn encourage others to also embrace ownership, responsibility, and transparency. So let's discuss.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey, welcome to the Ask Denis episode. This is a freestyle episode where I'm asked a question by our listeners, or I share my thoughts and experiences and insights from working with many leaders around the globe. Hey listeners, well, great to be with you on this episode of the Ask Denis episode that I do every Friday, which is a freestyle Friday or freestyle episode where I share some of my thoughts, as I said in the opening here. Now, one word that tends to come up time and time again is accountability. Accountability, you know what, isn't just about keeping track of what gets done. I actually think it's more than that. It's about a commitment to things like integrity, honesty, and the courage to own your actions. We're in a world today where leaders are constantly under a microscope, and if you can model accountability, I think that can be the difference maker that sets leaders apart from others. Now, accountability isn't just about a checkbox, you're ticking something off on a leadership to-do list. It's an important trait that can be demonstrated, it could be practiced, but it can be seen in action. And in my view, here's how you can model accountability to not motivate, to actually inspire those around you. So the first thing I would say is that we probably need to define accountability as a core thing that we do, a core pillar or a core principle. But that must be a central pillar of your leadership, not just style, but also approach. And this means making it clear to both yourself and to your team that accountability is non-negotiable. It's a must-have. We must do this. Already, actually, the way I look at it, it's a backbone of trust or building trust within your organization. Because you see, when accountability is clear, it eliminates things like ambiguity, but also then starts to reinforce or starts to show or starts to make people think about their expectations or what's expected of them. And if you can set an example by articulating your commitment to it openly and clearly, that's a really important thing for you to do. So how do you define accountability? Well, be very clear about what accountability looks like in action to you. Communicate how important it is, and do that communication in team meetings, but also in one-on-one discussions. But also explain that accountability isn't about blaming others, but it's about learning. It's about growth, but it's also about responsibility. Because when your team knows that accountability is a core pillar or principle, and it's not just there as a thing, then you're more likely going to be able to integrate it into your own actions and into their actions as well. The second thing I would say is be the first one to own your mistakes. What do we mean by this? Well, I think it's one of the most powerful ways to model accountability. And how? By actually owning your own mistakes. It's not about you lifting up the carpet and putting it under and hoping it's going to go away. But if there's one thing that I know that many leaders stumble, that sort of trips them up, it's because what they think is that making mistakes makes you feel vulnerable and admitting to it even more vulnerable. But actually, I think it's one of the strongest actions or one of the strongest things that a leader can take. And that is owning up to your mistakes. Because when you start to openly talk about it or put your hand up and go, yep, I'm acknowledging this, or I'm taking ownership that you've done an error, what you start to do is you start to set that powerful example for others and show them that accountability also includes accepting that you are not perfect and that taking steps to improve, to learn, and to grow is okay. Because when you openly admit to a mistake and are accountable, there's something that's really quite special. Something happens. You start to give permission for others to do the same. And then you start to create this culture where everyone feels safe to be accountable. It's very powerful. The third thing would be follow through on your commitments, but I'm going to add something else to it. Follow through on your commitments on a consistent basis. Don't just do it once and then not do it again later. You need to keep doing it, but keep doing it on a consistent basis. Because you see, accountability in leadership, it's all about the follow through. It's all about the follow up. Because if you're going to commit to doing something, do everything that's in your power to see it through. For me, in this podcast, I'm being accountable to myself, to my listeners, but I'm also being consistently showing up and doing it. And when you do that and you commit to doing it, it's a no-brainer. It happens. But also people are expecting it now that I show up every week to deliver the episodes. Especially now that the Leadership is Changing podcast is, according to ChatGPT, a go-to asset for leadership for leaders around the world. Why? Because we're being reliable. We are delivering on our commitment. And even though it's a small one, possibly to you and maybe to others as well, what it does, it starts to set a high standard and something else as well, which starts to build trust. And when your team starts to see that you honor your commitments and that you show accountability, not just a word, but a practice or a way of you doing leadership. In other words, what I said before about a leadership approach, that's very important. And when you model that reliability and consistency, what you start to do is you start, as I said before, set the high standard, but you start to raise the bar for everyone else on the team, and you make accountability a standard. Number 4, and it's an interesting one, because I think you need to communicate with transparency. Communication full stop is very important. Actually, communicating in a way that you connect with people is important. But I think transparency and communicating with transparency is important because transparency is part of being accountable. If you can do open, honest communication, what you're starting to do here is you're going to create an environment where people understand both what success is, but also understands setbacks as well, right? So they'll understand both. And I don't mean transparency means sharing everything. Now, please be mindful of this because you've got to be a little bit smart about what you do share. And I'm not saying that you're hiding things, but sometimes leaders overshare. And so I think you need to be a little bit smart about it. But what it does mean in communicating with transparency is about being clear, truthful, and open about decisions, about your intentions, or about results. So to help foster or to help transparency happen, if you can share your reasoning behind some decisions that you made, including things that could be around some challenges or limitations that are involved, that will help. But if you can create opportunities for open dialogue, two-way dialogue, where team members feel comfortable in asking questions or possibly even sharing some concerns. Now, when people see you communicate openly, it starts to show that accountability isn't about hiding our flaws, but it's about learning and progressing together. Number 5 is to make feedback a priority. And I think it's very important about the accountability side of things because accountability will actually thrive in a team or in an environment, in an organization where constructive feedback is welcome. It's okay to have that conversation and it's okay to provide constructive feedback. As a leader, what we need to do is we need to make sure we prioritize giving feedback and we're doing it on a regular basis. But also we should actively seek it as well. Show them, the team, that accountability includes a willingness to listen and to grow. And when people see that feedback as part of your leadership, then they're more than likely to seek out and embrace feedback in their own work. And what does it mean? Well, it actually starts to strengthen accountability across the board. Number 6, and this is the last one, is recognize accountability in others. I don't know whether leaders take enough time out to celebrate or recognize people, but accountability needs to be celebrated as much as success. Now, when you see team members taking ownership, whether it's in a challenging project or they're starting to admit a mistake or an oversight, or I think what we should do is acknowledge and recognize their ownership and also being honest. I've actually been doing some workshops of late, and I get them to do some pre-work. Now, in some of the workshops, there's been one or two people when we do the debrief on the pre-work, is because for some of them, I think they think that we're giving them pre-work, but they don't realize that we're going to be actually talking about it in the workshop. I don't understand why they wouldn't think of it, but sometimes that's what they are. And, they get a bit busy as well in life and in business. And so this sort of takes a seat in the back, and they probably don't do it much as well. But I think what we need to do is that we actually need to recognize that accountability side of things and celebrate it. And so when people have said to me, I haven't done the pre-work, I actually thank them and celebrate, or I actually don't celebrate, I actually thank them and recognize them and amongst their peers for being honest. And they're taking accountability of that, if they haven't done it. Now, when you see team members in your organization taking ownership, now, as I said before, whether it's a challenging project, whatever, then make sure you recognize it. Now, how do you encourage accountability? Well, you can publicly acknowledge acts of accountability in meetings or through team communications, but also you can actually reward accountability in performance reviews or maybe in some informal recognition, but making it clear that it's a trait or a way or an approach that you value. But you see, listeners, when accountability is celebrated, when it's recognized, it becomes part of the team culture and it inspires others to do it as well. The thing here is that if you can lead with integrity, then you can inspire with accountability. What do we mean by this? If you can model accountability, it's not just about holding others to account. It actually starts with you. It's about being first to set the standard. And when accountability is visible in your actions, it starts to resonate and become relatable for the whole of the entire team. A culture where people don't shy away from responsibility, but they lean into it. I love that concept, leaning into it. Where mistakes are learning opportunities and where everyone feels supported to be the best that they can be. If you can lead with integrity, act with transparency, and make accountability a guide for your actions, then you're going to set yourself up for success and build a strong and effective legacy. Okay, listeners, it's your call to action this week is to download the 10 proven ways to lead and to thrive in today's world. It's a document, it's a PDF document, it's awesome. It's got 10 main themes and 42 strategic insights. And I'm going to highly encourage you to download it if you haven't already done it. How do you download it? Well, whether you're listening to this podcast or this episode, there will be some show notes. And in those show notes, you will be able to see down below a link to it, and you can click on it. If you can't find the link, send me a message, private message on social media, on all the social media platforms, or send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com, and I'll get the link to you as quick as I can. Well, there you go, listeners. That's it for this episode. It's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for joining me on the Leadership is Changing podcast. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.